Good day, learners. We are now looking at source 1b on page 4 of your resource pack. We're continuing with the source-based question on the Great Depression. Source 1b tells us, this source explains the period of prosperity that occurred in the USA in the 1920s. In America, the daily life of the majority is conceived on a scale that is reserved for the privileged classes anyway. Now, to explain this to you, just look at the word conceived. Conceived means what people thought of something, how they viewed it. So the daily life of the majority of the Americans was seen as being like that of the privileged classes anywhere else. Majority of people in a country are normally middle to lower class people who have middle to lower class incomes. So in America, what they're telling us is that the majority were actually living the lives of people elsewhere in the world who were equivalent to the privileged classes, telling us that the ordinary people were living actually very comfortable lives in America. If you compared them to the wealthy people elsewhere, they seemed to be able to compare very favorably. So the standard of living was extremely high in the United States. The use of the telephone, for instance, is very widespread. You need to remember the telephone was a new invention, but already many Americans were using it. In 1925, there were 15 subscribers for every 100 inhabitants. So that means only 15% of Americans had the telephone, as compared with 2 in every 100 in Europe. And there were some 49 million conversations. It should be conversations, not conservations, conversations per day. Wireless is rapidly winning a similar position for itself. For even in 1924, the farmers alone possessed over 550,000 radios. Now, wireless here refers to the radio. That also was a new invention. Now look at the figure, 550,000 farmers were using the radio in 1924. That's a remarkable number. Statistics means information in the form of figures, for 1925 showed that the United States owned 81% of all the automobiles in existence. Automobiles, another word for vehicles, mainly cars, or 1 for every 5.6 people, as compared with 1 for every 49 and 54 in Great Britain and France. Though its population does not exceed 6% of the world total, the US or United States consumes or uses almost 3/4 of the available supply of rubber and gasoline. Gasoline means fuel, 2/3 of all the raw silk, and 1/4 of the sugar. So if you look at this, it's telling us that the US only made up 6% of the world's population, but they were using a significant amount of resources. 3/4, they tell us, that's 75% of rubber and gasoline, and about 66% of raw silk, and about 25%, that's 1/4 of the world's sugar. Americans were at this time prospering a great deal and using resources on a massive scale. We are now going to look at the associated questions to this particular source. The first question to source B tells us, quote evidence from the source that suggests that the USA had a high standard of living compared to other countries in the world. So quote evidence means you have to extract information which gives the proof that the Americans had a high standard of living. And here, your related answer will be, in America, the daily life of the majority is conceived on a scale that is reserved for the privileged classes anywhere else? That is the answer. So like I told you earlier, if you compare the Americans to any other country, the ordinary American was living the high life, which could compare with the rich people elsewhere in the world. The second question asks you, list 2 electrical appliances that became very popular. 2 times 1, 2 answers there. That's simple from the source. And there you will say the radio and the telephone. The third question, with reference to the word automobiles, which car was produced in the USA in the 1920s? That was known as the Model T Ford. Going back to the questions, 1, 2, 4, use the source and your own knowledge to explain how the production of automobiles stimulated the American economy in the 1920s. Stimulated means it improved, increased, gave rise to greater production. So 2 answers for 2 marks. For this particular question, you will look at it stimulated the growth of other industries. It created a demand for glass, steel, and rubber. These are all raw materials that are needed in the manufacture of a vehicle. It boosted the petrol and oil industries, obviously because there's a greater demand for cars, there'll be a greater demand for fuel and other related industries. It boosted transport industries. It created more jobs. So any 2 from there would give you 4 marks. The last question related to this source, comment on why the period of prosperity would not last forever. When they ask you to comment, they want you to give the view, the explanation as to why America could not go on being prosperous. In other words, the economy would not continue to grow forever. And here, any 2 of these answers would be acceptable. The American farmers did not share the prosperity. What this meant was that although industries, manufacturing industries were boosted, American farmers were still struggling to sell their products and get a decent profit. Unskilled and unemployed people did not share in this wealth. So although I told you there were a lot of Americans living the high life, those who were unskilled, in other words, they had no training in any particular field, or those who were unemployed, they did not get to benefit from the improvement in the economy. The third one, there were glaring weaknesses in the economy that was overlooked. There were some strong, or there were great problems in the economy that the government did not want to admit, like the high tariffs for import duties. Black workers didn't share in the wealth as they were underpaid and given low-paying jobs. This was part of the discrimination that was very prevalent in the US at that time, which of course continues up to this day. So any 2 of those answers would be acceptable for 2 marks each, giving you a total of 4. We are next going to look at the following source related to the Great Depression.